Welcome to Our Girl Relationships. We talk about the problems people face in their day-to-day lives. Let's start with the video.
I'm male, 30. My brother Dan, male, 24, thinks that he is the next Elon Musk. He's a serial entrepreneur, but almost all of his businesses have been busts. There was one exception where he founded a tech startup with a really smart friend of his from college and sold his share for a huge profit. However, everything else from him has been a passion project that's only been sustained due to our parents and their support. Dan, though, doesn't take it that way and instead considers the fact that he made money once to be proof that he has something special in him. I know I sound mean, but that's just me venting right now. I will fully admit that the only reason he can do this is that both of us come from a wealthy background, and I am completely comfortable saying that both of us are, or were, spoiled trust fund babies. However, I was always inspired by the kind of hard work my dad did to keep our family comfortable, and I went to an Ivy League college and graduated with a huge salary. I've also worked on investing and have multiple income streams running for me right now. I'm proud to say that I have been able to contribute to the family's wealth, even if I got a head start over a lot of people. Dan, though, took things completely differently from me. Instead of being grateful for the kind of lifestyle we led, he took it for granted and constantly screwed around during his childhood. He, like me, went to the same Ivy League college through some string pulling. But unlike me, he didn't even bother trying to work hard or graduate with any shot at making money. Instead, becoming a frat boy, running his own wolf pack and making his own failed version of Facebook after watching The Social Network. Right now, he's unemployed, discovering himself, and living in our parents' second house in LA rent-free. The money he made from his old tech company has long since been drained on parties and call girls. But as long as my parents were comfortable supporting his endeavors, I was cool with it. They always had faith in him anyways and still believed that he would turn things around. No comment on that. About 4 months ago, I got a call from Dan asking me to hear him out on his next venture. As always, he sold it as the next big thing, his best idea yet. Out of sheer curiosity, I asked him what it would be, and to my surprise, he said it was so top secret that I would have to come to meet him in person in LA. Apparently, he'd asked my parents to be there too. I decided to go because even if it wasn't a good idea, it'd be a nice trip and I could catch up with my parents. So after a bit of back and forth, I ended up going to get in at the ground level, as Dan put it. When I got to Dan's house in LA, I was shocked to see that he had set up what seemed like basically a small event on the front lawn. There was a little dais, a projector, and a lot of themed material. Needless to say, I was actually quite impressed. My parents were also there, and since they already ate up the regular crap Dan proposed, this seemed like the promise of a good future. Even more interestingly, there were a lot of really influential people there. Like, not Tom Cruise or anything, but a few C-list actors and other famous people. Dan welcomed us all and asked us to network while he got his presentation ready. So far, it seemed like a fun experience. However, when his presentation finally started, there were a ton of red flags. What Dan was proposing was, to put it simply, a massive pyramid scheme. He wanted to create an affiliate influencer program where you sell hack packs to small influencers to greatly increase their social outreach. You get paid based on the number of people you bring into the program with fast and easy cash. Herbalife much? And then the influencers you bring in get followers from selling hack packs to other people. I'll admit it was all very neatly presented, but anyone with half a brain or an accountant could tell that something fishy was up. But the people there were eating it up. Dan had already done some ground level testing and had around 50 people already ensnared in his pyramid scheme. It wasn't my problem, though, since I was simply hoping to slink away after the whole event was over and make up some excuse to not invest, i.e. rip people off. But to my dismay, Dan announced from the dais, and now I'd like to invite the biggest investors in my journey of growth onto the stage, my family. Yikes. I went up to the stage with mom and dad, and while they spoke about how many ventures Dan has done and made the potential investors there feel trust for Dan, I just kind of sheepishly stood around without saying anything. Dan nudged me a few times, but I just kept my mouth shut and smiled. When the event was dying down, Dan confronted me in private and asked me why I'd embarrassed him like that. I was getting tired of his overconfident attitude, and I just ended up saying, "Man, the only thing that's embarrassing about this is your business plan. Those schmucks out there might buy it, but I'm not. I don't even know how you got them on board." That set him off. And he went on about how he's been hustling out in LA and building contacts, and he's going to make billions while I'm only thinking in millions. I know this trip was already shot to hell, so I just walked off to my rented car and booked a flight back home. On the way there, though, I got a call from my dad, who was still staying over at the house. He started off reasonably enough by saying that he just didn't like my attitude with Dan, which I mean is reasonable. But then he tells me that he thinks there's something special in this venture and that he and Mom are investing a sizable chunk in it too. To show Dan solidarity and support as a family, they wanted me to match their investment. When I declined, he broke out his trump card. "Son, if you don't invest in this program, your mother and I will give our entire estate and all our assets to your brother. He clearly has big plans and needs the money. I hate to say it, but we're going to cut you off until you realize how important this idea is for your little brother. Just be a good sibling, kid." I had to do a double take after hearing this. I mean, not giving me a share of the family estate over this? I know my brother had sweet-talked Dad into buying into this venture using terms he didn't like, UGC and niche market capitalization or whatever. Despite running a successful business, Dad wasn't too familiar with newer content-based industries. Even worse was the fact that he looked at everything my brother did with rose-colored glasses. So there was no point trying to talk sense into him. I told him to go ahead on the call, and afterward spoke to a friend of mine who worked in the FTC who could take a look at Dan's business and bust him. I was thinking on my feet at this moment, and honestly, I made this move out of spite more than anything. If my dad wanted to make petty threats, I was going to clap back with something serious, and they could deal with the consequences. After a month, I got a call from my brother where he was freaking out, saying that he was being called in by the FTC to his local police station and that someone had grossly misrepresented his venture. I feigned shock and watched as his influencer program was burnt to the ground. Although the severity of his crime meant that he owed a ton of money to the government in fees and fines, not to mention his lawyer's fees as well. Dan didn't have the cash on him, so he had to call Mom and Dad to prevent filing for bankruptcy. This snowballed into an amount so massive that my parents need to sell off their second home to pay for his mess. At the end of this whole escapade, my parents are down a house, and Dan is starting from zero and without any support from Mom and Dad to fund his new ventures. He's going to be living in an apartment in Cali and working ground level in Dad's firm to keep his head above water. I'll admit, I enjoyed the downfall of Dan's latest venture, but it snowballed way out of proportion for me. I expected a bunch of fees and that the business would close down, but I had no idea Mom and Dad would have to end up selling the house. I'm starting to feel a little guilty. AITA for taking it to the government? Update 1. Dan has lost a lot of credibility with my parents after everything that has happened. They called me a couple of days ago to apologize for strong-arming me to invest and reversed their stance by saying that if they pass, all major assets will be given to me with a clause allowing Dan to receive a stipend. I thank my parents for the apology, but now it's eating me up that they don't know I was the reason behind them losing their house. I want to come clean, but everyone is advising me against it. They've also asked me to come to visit them over their house in Beverly Hills because they need to discuss something urgent with me. I'll keep you guys posted on what that is. Update 2. Big news. Dad said that he wants to hand over the reins of his firm to me, not as a part of his will or anything, but ASAP. It did sound too good to be true, and Dan's court hearing had made people aware of his investment in the venture too, and that had tarnished his image a little. Furthermore, our family's assets were also running quite low, and the business had been struggling for some time. I won't look at it as a burden, though. It's got good foundations, and I am considering quitting my salaried job to take over from Dad. Update 3. I took the plunge. I put my savings into rebuilding the business, but something else had to pop up and create a hurdle, LOL. I got a call from Dan after he found out I was the new CEO, and he asked me to bump him up to the C-suite of the business since he had big plans for the business. By now, you can tell that my parents were done with him, and I was too. I told him that if he could work his way up to me, I'd welcome him with open arms, but he needed to show the work. Also, nobody in the family knows that it was me who ratted Dan out to this day. I think I'll have to keep it that way. ESH, your brother is an idiot, and you seem pretty heartless for only reporting the venture out of spite instead of doing it to make sure people don't get scammed. However, all's well that ends well, and I'm glad that your parents have finally realized your brother isn't creating amazing ideas. Good for their heart and bad for their wallet, LOL. NTA, but these problems are so first world, man. I was taken aback, but you seem to recognize your privilege and work hard regardless. I find it a little suspicious that you were cool with his scheme as long as you weren't affected, but NGL, sometimes it's just too exhausting to fix things for everyone, so I get it. Next story. My parents live in the UK while I live overseas. My cousin, 21, female, also lives in the UK and is pregnant with her first child. Her parents live overseas. However, it is normal in our culture to go to stay with your parents for the first month or so after you give birth, so they can help with the baby and help you get back on your feet. My dad is her closest relative in the UK, so she asked my parents if she can stay with them after she gives birth, and they agreed. Now, the house is jointly owned by Mom, Dad, and I. There are 2 guest rooms as well as my room, which isn't occupied when I'm not there, obviously. The larger of the guest rooms is only slightly smaller than my room, but it has an ensuite. I go back home every 2 to 3 months and put a lot of money into renovating my room, and there are also lots of baby supplies there for my own 7-month-old too. Think cot, sleeping nest, bathtub, car seat, etc. So my cousin is due any time in the next fortnight, and this week she texted me to tell me she wants to use my room. I told her no, that's my space. It needs to be open for me to travel home. She said it was the nicest of the available rooms and she needs to be comfortable while recovering from childbirth. Edit. She also said she wants to use my son's cot, car seat, and anything else there is to make my life easier after delivery. So basically, she wants to use my baby supplies instead of making sure she has her own. I said no, she can't just help herself to my space and belongings. She started having a meltdown at me over text, so I got my parents involved. She got her mom involved, and now my aunt is arguing with my dad, saying he's allowing me to bully her pregnant daughter when she has nobody else to defend her, and how my dad should discipline me and be there for his niece. I don't think I'm in the wrong, but they're making such a huge deal. I'm wondering if maybe I am the AH. NTA, if your aunt is so mad, she should make arrangements to take her in. Your cousin is a moocher, and I have a feeling your parents are going to have a hard time kicking her out once she's well planted. NTA, if she really wanted to be comfortable after childbirth, she would take the room with the ensuite bathroom. She's really wanting to use all your baby's furniture and supplies without having to get her own. I would bet she gave her mom some kind of exaggerated story so that your aunt would try to bully you and your parents into letting your cousin have her way. Since you are part owner of the house and the owner of the baby stuff, stand your ground. Talk to your parents about getting your cousin back to her own place as soon as possible. Next story. I'm 29, male, engaged to my fiancée, Ellie, 28, female. Both of us are working from home. Ellie has PTSD, which is triggered by loud, unexpected sounds, sometimes any noises, and it makes her freak out and causes severe panic and anxiety attacks. She's getting therapy. Just to add, she is not freaked out by anything dropping or closing the fridge door, but slamming the house door too loud, crying to the point of screeching, and loud banging or doorbell ringing constantly do. Because of this and some other issues, we are child-free. My sister has 2 kids. Youngest is 7-year-old called Richard, Rich for short. She also has a cat she adopted, which is also called Richard. We call him Duke for short. Sometimes she asks to cat sit Duke, which we don't mind as he loves to play with our cat. That's rather sensitive to loud noises too. Tuesday, my sister messages me asking if we mind if she drops Duke around. We didn't. After a bit, she texts me that he is by the front door and she has to drive off due to an emergency, which confuses me as she never did that before. Imagine my surprise when I see Rich instead. Ellie is in an important work meeting, and my sister said nothing about dropping the kid off, as she knows the answer will be no as we are working. Rich doesn't say anything and runs to the living room. He turns the TV on, puts the volume up so Ellie can hear it in the meeting, and tries to turn one of the consoles, which I say he can't do, as we do not have games suitable for children, nor the space to download any. Our internet is rather slow. Rich doesn't listen, so I had no choice but to take the consoles away and tell him to put the volume down on the TV and he can watch shows on Disney. Rich didn't like that and throws a tantrum. Within an hour of him being in the house, I have to deal with Rich crying and screeching and not responding to any ways to calm him, wanting to play a game we don't have, which affects not just my work but Ellie's too. And instead of being productive in an important work meeting, she is having a panic attack and struggles to breathe while our cat is going nuts too. I have been trying to call my sister with no luck. Despite showing as online on social media, she was not responding. So had to message the family group chat and say she has 20 minutes to pick Rich up. Otherwise, I'll be calling the police because she is abandoning her child. And he would be left outside. I wouldn't leave him outside, but was serious about the police. My mother had to leave work and pick him up as my sister read the message, but didn't take it seriously, while my mother knows I wasn't joking. Later that day, my sister called me to tell me that I'm a horrible uncle and an a-hole since she had an emergency and this ended up in an argument. The family is obviously split about this since my sister is considered the golden child and I'm apparently an evil uncle. So AITA? Edit. Before people ask, Ellie was held captive as a child and is one of a few survivors of a terrorist attack. That's where her PTSD comes from, alongside with some other issues. Edit 2. I feel like I can't cope replying to everyone, so I just want to add something that is getting asked frequently. The emergency was my sister's best friend giving birth to another baby. My sister was not one of her support people and just stayed outside the delivery room the entire time as her friend's husband and mother were there with her boyfriend. My sister just wanted to be one of the first to see the baby. The delivery was also risk-free and without any complications. Her other kid was staying with her friend from school and went on a trip to an amusement park that day. That's why only one was dropped at mine. And just to clarify, my sister did say Duke and not Richard, Rich. So to me and the rest of the family, it was clear she talks about the cat, not a child. NTA. Someone leaving a young child outside someone else's front door unattended with no warning is itself something to consider calling CPS about. Seriously, what? What if the kid wandered off before she called? What if they had had their own emergency after the initial text and had left the house? She didn't even make sure adults were there. Seriously, what was she thinking? And that's entirely beside all the other considerations. Stay tuned for more stories from our girl relationships.